in this video we will go through 7 common mistakes that beginners Python developers make. The first mistake is about indentation. Correct indentation is a must in Python. Incorrect indentation in a Python program represents a syntax error. Let's take, for example, the following code. And now let's execute this code in our terminal. The Python interpreter throws an exception because the print statement inside the for loop has to be indented. As you can see, the exception is of type indentation error. We will confirm that the exception type indentation error is a type of syntax error. And to do that, we will use the is subclass built-in function. Let's open the Python terminal. The function returns a boolean with value true that confirms that indentation error is a type of syntax error. Now the important thing. To fix this error, we have to indent the print statement. This is something that Python IDEs will help you with. VS Code is telling us that an indented block is expected. So let's indent the print statement. As you can see, the error is now fixed. Let's try to execute the code again. The error is fixed. Let's move to the second mistake, and it's about the colon character and if statements. A colon is required at the end of the header, so the first line, of a Python if statement. Missing the colon will cause a syntax error. Here is an example. Let's write a basic if statement that prints a message depending on the value of the variable x. When you run this code, you get back the following error. The invalid syntax comes from the fact that I have forgotten to add a colon at the end of the first line of the if statement. Let's fix this error by adding a colon at the end of the first line of the if statement. And now, if we run the code again, we get back x is lower than 20, that is what we expected. Now, let's move to mistake number 3. A common mistake is to use a variable before assigning a value to it. Let's have a look at an example of code that shows this. Create a for loop that reads all the numbers from a list called numbers and appends the numbers that are greater than 2 to a new list called updated_numbers. As you can see from VS Code, there is already something wrong in the code. This error says the updated numbers is not defined, But let's run this code and let's see what happens. We get back exactly the same error. Name updated underscore numbers is not defined. And that's because we haven't assigned a value to the updated numbers list before using it in the for loop. Let's assign an empty list to updated underscore numbers and let's see what happens. As you can see, this error has now disappeared. Let's try to execute this code again. That's good. So we have fixed the error in our code by initializing the updated underscore numbers list to an empty list before the for loop. So remember to do that. Now let's move to mistake number 4, trying to modify immutable objects. This is a very common Python mistake. You cannot modify an immutable object in Python. That's the reason why it's called immutable as opposed to mutable, where mutable is an object that can be modified. For example, a list is mutable and we can modify its elements. Let's have a look at this code. With the first print statement, we print the animals list after appending the dolphin string to it. With the second print statement, we print the animals list after updating the first element of the list with the string shark. The first element in a list is the one identified by index 0. A common error is trying to do the same thing with a tuple, an immutable data type in Python. Here is our tuple. The only difference in the way a list and a tuple are represented is that a list uses square brackets and a tuple uses parentheses. Now let's see what happens if we try to append the string dolphin to the tuple animals. Let's comment the other code for now. We get back an attribute error that says that the tuple has no attribute append, and the tuple has no method append because it's immutable, and for this reason new items cannot be added to it. Let's comment the first 2 lines and uncomment the other 2 lines. This time we'll try to update the first element of the tuple. We get back a type error that says that our object does not support item assignment. In other words, this is telling us that tuples are immutable, and for this reason we cannot update the value of the first item in the tuple. And if you're wondering, but what's the point of using tuples if we cannot modify them? Have a look at the article I linked in the description below where I talk more about tuples and how tuples can be used in your Python programs. And now let's move to mistake number 5. Python loops don't always need an index. Let's write a for loop that goes through all the elements of a list. Now let's modify our for loop slightly. Let's use a version of the for loop in which Python handles indexing for you. Can you see the output is exactly the same? This change also has two advantages. It makes your code more readable, because there is no need to use the range and len functions. And also, it prevents errors caused by trying to manage indexes in your code. This is the case especially if the code inside the for loop becomes more complex. So to recap, in a Python for loop, you don't always need an index. By default, Python can handle indexing transparently to make your code easier to write and read. You should only use an index in your for loop if you really need it in the logic of your code. And now let's move to mistake number 6. Confusing the equality operator with the assignment operator. A common mistake is to mix the Python equality operator with the assignment operator. Let me tell you more about that. Python provides one operator to assign values to a variable, the assignment operator, and one operator to verify if variables have the same value, the equality operator. When you're getting started with Python and sometimes with other programming languages, you might confuse those two operators and use them in the wrong place. For example, let's look at the following code. We have an if statement that prints a different message depending on the value of the variable day. Let's see what happens when we execute this code. We get back a syntax error because we are using the assignment operator instead of the equality operator when we check if the variable day is equal to Tuesday. You can see that line highlighted in the error. Let's replace equal with double equal. As expected, now we get back the message today is not Tuesday, because the value of day is Monday. Nice, we fixed mistake number 6. And now the last mistake, number 7. Trying to modify a Python list while iterating through it. For example, a common error is to remove an item from a list while you are iterating through the list. Let's see what happens if we write a for loop that accesses the items of a list using their index, and then you try to remove an item from that list inside the for loop. When you run this code, Python throws an index error and says the list index is out of range. Let's try to find out more about this error by printing the value of the index and the size of the list at every iteration of the for loop. We have more info now, so let's try to figure out what's going on. In the first iteration, index is 0, the size of the list is 3, the if condition is true. It's true because the first element of the list is orange, that starts with O. And the string orange gets removed from the list fruits. We then print fruits of 0, that is now apple, because orange has been removed from the list. In the second iteration, index is 1, the size of the list is 2, the if condition is false because banana doesn't start with the letter O, and then we print fruits of 1, that is banana. Now let's move to the third iteration. In the third iteration, index is 2, but the size of the list is still 2, so the maximum index allowed is 1. That's why we see the list index out-of-range error. Remember, the indexes start from 0, so the indexes for a list of size 2 are 0 and 1. The error comes from the fact that the indexes are generated based on the initial size of the list, and they don't change even if the list size changes after removing one item from it. Well done, we completed all the 7 common mistakes. Let's recap them. Mistake number 1 is the incorrect use of Python indentation that causes syntax errors. Mistake number 2 is due to the colon character that cannot be missed at the end of the header in an if statement. Mistake number 3 is about the fact that you cannot use a variable before assigning a value to it. Mistake number 4, don't try to modify an immutable object, for example a tuple. Mistake number 5, remember to handle indexes manually in a for loop only when strictly required. Mistake number 6, don't confuse equality and assignment operators. And finally, mistake number 7, avoid modifying a Python list while looping through it. And that's it for this tutorial. Now you're aware of these common Python errors that can occur while you write your code. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like, and also subscribe to this channel to get more of these videos and to accelerate your learning curve as a Python developer. Thanks again for watching and see you in the next video.